Thank you for that kind introduction. So I'm Sara Johansson from the European Environmental Bureau in Brussels. We are a network of environmental civil society organizations across Europe and beyond. We now count 180 members in more than 40 countries. And as an organization, we work on a broad set of topics ranging from nature protection, climate change mitigation, but also health and environment, industrial policies. So it's a broad range of topics that we cover. But today I was invited to speak on the topic of the Water Framework Directive and more precisely share some ideas on how it can be better implemented. So I will do that, although it will probably be a non-exhaustive list of suggestions and comments. But to start with, as we're in the conference of water resilience, I wanted to come back to this report prepared by EA earlier this year that Europe is not prepared for climate change. We're the fastest warming continent. We're seeing already heat, drought, but also flooding events, fires. And one of the findings of the report was that our policies and adaptation actions are not at pace with these risks. And I think you're all aware, and if you weren't before thanks to the previous speakers, you should be now very well aware that we depend on our freshwater ecosystems to provide us with water. But these ecosystems are also in the midst of the triple planetary crisis. I mentioned already climate change. We're sensing it through the water disruptions in the water cycle. We say too much or too little. We're facing biodiversity loss, and freshwater ecosystems are amongst the most threatened. And yeah, I think the Dr. Varibo's studies is extremely telling in this regard. And pollution is a driver of biodiversity loss, but also a driver of water scarcity. One of our members in member organizations in Spain showed earlier this year that 200,000 people in Spain, that is in very challenging water situation, even people having water in the tap, 200,000 people cannot drink it because of excess levels of nitrate pollution from agriculture. So protection of and restoration of freshwater ecosystems is really key to ensure long-term water resilience. And fortunately, we have a tool for this. We have the WFD. We have had it for almost a quarter of a century now, with the objective to protect and restore Europe's waters, covering inland, coastal, transitional, and groundwater bodies. And used well, it's a good tool thanks to being thanks to the integrative approach, if that's a word in English. It can serve really as a planning tool across sectors to ensure water quantity and quality. Oops. Oh my goodness. So here we go. So as you might be aware, unfortunately, we have by far surpassed the deadline, the principal deadline of the WFD, which was 2015. And more than 20 years after the adoption, the member states are still far from delivering on their legal obligations to bring Europe's water to good status. More than half of Europe's water are not in good status. I put here some numbers from the 2018 State of Water report from EA. We're eagerly waiting for the updated version from this year. But you can see the numbers there with the little remark that we have large, these are the EU average, but we have large regional differences. I put some numbers on groundwater there, also reflecting different monitoring efforts. So when we speak about poor implementation, I just wanted to make it a little bit more concrete. What does it mean? So I picked 3 examples that were flashing by during summer. So it's really random, but I think they are also quite telling. In Belgium, in Flanders, an industry was granted an indefinite permit to discharge cobalt at levels 1,000 times the environmental quality standard. And the argumentation was that the receiving water body, the Grote Nette, already had poor water quality, so the authorities thought it could allow this. But that was successfully challenged by our members, thanks to them. And as a note, in Flanders, only 1 out of 195 surface water bodies are in good status. So if you would take this argumentation and scale it up, then you could have these very lax discharge permits all over the place. In France, in the Adour sub-basin, there was a scientifically established number on how much water can be sustainably withdrawn in 2009, but then there was a politically agreed target involving farmer associations that set the permits 35% higher, mostly going to agriculture. Again, this was challenged by one of our French members, successfully challenged. And to be noted that this is was also in a basin where ecological flows are predicted to decrease quite significantly over the next decades due to climate change. And then finally, the example from 3 countries, actually, where permits for abstraction and discharges have been can be granted for several decades at a time, or even for an unlimited duration without regular review. Although the WFD requires the member states to establish programs of measures where you should probably regularly make sure that your abstraction is fitting within the available water quantity. But the European Commission has now opened infringement procedures against these 3 countries due to this reason. So now, coming to what needs to change, and again, it's a non-exhaustive list of thoughts. Oops. I just wanted first to remind that the WFD recently underwent a fitness check evaluation, and the European Commission found it to be fit for purpose. And the reason for the poor level of implementation is largely due to insufficient funding, insufficient implementation, and insufficient integration of environmental objectives in sectoral policies. And it was noted also that chemicals is a key area where there is room to improve. So, on enforcement. So it's clear that member states could do better, but the European Commission is, as we say, the guardian of the treaties with the role of ensuring that environmental law is complied with. But what we've seen, most of the infringement procedures related to the WFD have been focused on sort of formal failures and like delayed delivery of RBMPs, and would rather like to see more focus on the insufficiency of the measures and to help ensure that we reach the objectives of 2027. So we believe there is a need for a stronger political will, but we also acknowledge that more resources and staff is needed for DG Environment and the legal services to actually be able to achieve this. Streamlining water protection. Again, a lot more could be wished from the national governments, but there is also limits to what you can do within a river basin management plan. So sometimes EU instruments are steering decisions in the wrong direction, and this has been lifted by many others, including in the WFD fitness check. So as an example, the EU's largest expenditure, the CAP, is skewed towards intensive farming instead of encouraging sustainable water use. So that's an important one. But also, if we talk about substances like PFAS, we need action at EU level. Also, someone previously mentioned the SUR that has been dropped. It's also an area where, in terms of pesticide regulation, where we need EU rules to help the member states. So yeah, in terms of PFAS, we need a broad PFAS restriction to come to terms with that problem. On financing, so lack of finances is, or was cited as one of the most common hurdles to implementation of the programs of measures in the second RBMPs. There is a number there on the investment gap in the number of billions for France to achieve good status of water bodies. But at the same time, the member states don't fully make use of the economic instruments that are given in the WFD, like proper implementation of cost recovery, although it's actually an obligation. We did a study a few years back looking at one of the most polluting industries in Europe, the coal mining and combustion industry, and we could see that in many coal-heavy member states, this industry is actually granted to withdraw water for free or at a very low cost. So there you can definitely see the discrepancy between the impact that this industry is causing and the very little contribution they make to the budget that needs to deal with the consequences. And now, topic very close to my heart. I followed this update of the lists of EU water pollution standards for a while now. So the topic came up also a little bit earlier today, so even if the numbers on compliance with chemical status under WFD is quite depressing, with less than 40% of surface water complying, this is only assessed against a very small number of substances. We have 45 priority substances for surface water, although many more are present. I took a recent study there, and I'm happy to provide the reference. But more than 500 chemicals were found in samples from 22 rivers across Europe. And many of the samples, the majority of the samples contained 50 plus chemicals in one sample. So it's also the question of the so-called cocktail effects that can occur even when the individual substances are present at supposedly safe levels. And actually the highest number of chemicals in a single sample was in the Danube. And there 80% of the samples were outside the safe operating space for aquatic organisms. So the list of EU surface and priority substances for surface and groundwater, it's quite out of date, I would say, although it's a legal requirement to update them every 6 years. And in October 2022, the Commission came with their proposal to update these lists and proposed to add, for example, PFAS, a group of 24 PFAS, where pharmaceuticals and new pesticides to the list. This is now going to be negotiated between the EU institutions. We hope that this will start soon. And if adopted, the member states will need to monitor a couple more substances and make sure that the legal thresholds are not exceeded. But I think that's also important, and I think it was what Dr. Baribo also mentioned, that we need proper monitoring to fully understand the pressures that are felt by aquatic organisms. And finally, I wish I wouldn't have had to include this one, but unfortunately, we're seeing increasingly that the WFD is seen by certain actors rather as a hurdle than a tool to ensure water for future generations. So as part of this legal update of the water pollution standards, the member states in the Council took the opportunity to propose that we should have new exemptions to the WFD, with view to, as they said or argued, to mitigate the outcome of recent court rulings, also brought on by some of our members. So it's also quite worrying that when we have court rulings that clarify how the WFD should be interpreted and that it should be interpreted strictly, the member states try to find ways to circumvent those court rulings. The member states also would like to set compliance date for these new substances to 2039, with legal possibility to derogate for 2 more river basin management plans until 2051, and to only for the next 10 years monitor these substances, but not to put any measures in place. So we really want to see measures for these new substances in the next river basin management plans, and with an aim to comply by 2033. And also, we had a few days ago the Draghi report on competitiveness that also pits environmental protection, including water protection, against competition, and asks for targeted updates of several legal texts, including the Water Framework Directive, to include certain exemptions. So I would say, to improve the implementation of the WFD, it's clear that we need to keep the WFD intact. It's a basis. So any of these proposals to undermine the WFD, introduce new exemptions, amend core principles, or delay timelines should be strongly opposed. So, okay, perfect. So I'm actually, I think, in my last slide. So to sum up, we need significantly increased ambition by the member states to reach the objectives by 2027, which is basically tomorrow. It should be aided by enforcement action by the European Commission when these rules are not followed. And we need, as I said, that water protection objectives are streamlined into other pieces of legislation, such as agricultural and industrial chemical policies, to avoid conflicting efforts. And sadly, last point I had to add, any attempts to weaken or undermine the WFD needs to be strongly opposed. So that was it. Those are my contact details. In case you would like to reach out, we're also on Twitter, Facebook, and on Instagram, and also on LinkedIn. I didn't have them all, but you can find us there. Thank you.